This podcast is brought to you by Ranch Vision, the software ranchers use to boost profits and make better decisions.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rich Brazil. I am the founder of Ranch Vision. This program was designed for producers like you. It's a unique, one-of-a-kind, forward-looking software program that enables you to see the results of your management decisions months and years into the future, from your herd numbers to your replacement costs, break-even values, enterprise efficiency, your profit and loss, your cash flow, and so much more. With this program, you can move forward with confidence into the future. Ranch Vision isn't a historical record-keeping program like all the other programs you might have seen. It looks forward. It is a very challenging, very competitive industry, and every ranch business is unique, has different variables, different opportunities, different constraints. Ranch Vision was designed to take uncertainty out of your future, to enable you to plan to profit. Please go to our website to learn more, www.ranchvision.io. Grazing livestock and just grazing animals in general are a significant part of the planet. That really is the planet.
The average age of the farmer in America is 58 years old. That is not sustainable.
We've been hit with water curtailments. We've been hit with low prices by the conditions, by the rain, by the lamb crop, by the calf crop.
I heard a Native American gentleman say, wilderness, that's an invention of the white man, because we took care of this land.
Sometimes fighting doesn't mean shouting and screaming and pounding your fist. Sometimes it's just putting your boots on and being there for work the next day.
It is, are the American people fit to govern themselves, to rule themselves, to control themselves? I believe they are. My opponents do not. I believe in the right of the people.
There are cowboys still around. You just probably don't see them because we're working all the time.
I'm Keely Brazil Cavallo, and this is America on One.
Guys, welcome back to Unwon. I'm here with a good friend of mine, Tate Bennett Roman from America First Policy Institute. Tate, tell us a little about yourself. Give us your title. I want to hear all about Tate today.
All about me. Oh my gosh. Well, let's see. What more do you need to know? So Tate Bennett, I am the Director of Rural Policy here at the America First Policy Institute. Don't judge me, but I've spent my career in Washington, which is okay because I have an ag background. Yeah.
This is a good
I know.
thing.
Well, I met my husband here, and we're halfway between where he's from in New England and Kentucky, where I'm from. And so we're smack in the middle. So it's only fair. But I grew up on a horse farm right outside of Louisville in Kentucky. My parents still breed and train horses today. It's a lot like any other piece of the livestock industry, that all the manure smells the same. It's just as much work, a lot of acreage. So I moved to DC just to intern on Capitol Hill out of college, and I really gravitated toward the agriculture and rural issues because I understood them. I knew the farmers and constituents coming up to represent their best interests and talk to their lawmakers. And so I followed that path. I worked in the first Trump administration at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for 3 years. I worked at the White House for Larry Kudlow, who was the director of the National Economic Council in 2020, handling his ag portfolio. And now I get to do it at his think tank, and Secretary Rollins, who's obviously departed, but her think tank she founded, the America First Policy Institute, where we're in the trenches every day, aren't we?
Absolutely. There's so many things we can talk about because we've worked together on a few projects now, but I wanted to talk to you today about this paper you just put out on Mexican gray wolves, which is super, super interesting. Not something I know a ton about. We have a different wolf threat up here in Northern California, the Intermountain West, but very related. But really quick, just the Rural Policy Institute, as I understand, it's like the only think tank that really focuses on rural issues. Is that correct?
In my view, and it's what I define as issues important to rural America.
Right. Which I just spoke with Heather Maud the other day. We were talking about how disconnected DC is from rural America. So you guys are working to fix that, and you're doing a great job. You were involved in the Maud family's case. You've helped a bunch of farmers on the ground dealing with issues that rural Americans are all too familiar with, and DC often isn't. So you're doing phenomenal work. It's nice to have a
Thank
Kentucky
you.
girl in DC. Thank God for you.
Well, I've learned all about larger production agriculture, the fruit and vegetable sector. It's taken a lot of education. Kentucky does a little bit of a lot of things. No cotton, no rice, a couple other things, but we try. So
You've been out west quite a bit since you started. You've been to South Dakota a few times, I think. You've traveled
I
out here a
have.
bit. Yeah.
I've actually gotten to visit. So when I had both my kids during the first Trump administration. So intermittently I'd get to travel, and I made it out to North Dakota. Like you mentioned, I just went to South Dakota during the admin. I went to a couple different places in Colorado. Yeah, I got to spend a lot of time getting to know different pockets of the very vast agriculture sector here in the United States.
Yeah, and that's a big umbrella. Is there anything that you would say the center is focused on specifically? Any issues?
Well, we're very much taking on sort of a new agricultural specific policy lane, and revitalizing rural America is certainly a priority. We have really honed in, and that's where we've worked a lot together on the issue of agricultural lawfare, just this larger issue of fighting weaponization of government. That's something that I inherited joining AFPI just earlier this year. It's part of our founding nature that we take on protection of private property rights just generally. And so to look at it specifically from a farmers and ranchers agricultural lens, like there's definitely some parallel tracks there.
Like the Henry family, which, if you guys aren't familiar, this was a family whose 21-acre, 175-year-old farm was about to be taken over by Cranberry Township for affordable housing under eminent domain. So Secretary Rollins spoke out about that. And I think that, even though it was a New Jersey case, that's very familiar and relevant to people out west who have been experiencing property rights infringements and that kind of lawfare for a long time. One of the areas that I think a lot of us out west have seen a lot of that lawfare happen is under the Endangered Species Act, which is a 1970s law that has good intentions and has had really good effect in protecting our endangered and vulnerable species. But over time, I would say, and I'm curious your thoughts, Tate, that it's been thwarted and kind of used to bludgeon farmers and producers by creating all of these protections for species that may or may not really be endangered, or forcing actions that may or may not protect those species. Is that fair? What's your read?
Well, I think a lot of folks have either advertently or inadvertently, candidly, just because they're so focused on that environmentalist mission on these species. A lot of times the big picture is lost, and they end up putting these animals and sometimes predators, which is what I think we're going to talk about today, before the best interests of humans, right? And so that's where AFBI is like, all right, like we all want clean air, clean water, great environments for our species and animals. But when that becomes a detriment and impediment to people, that's a problem.
It's not like ranchers are opposed to protecting endangered species. Like here in California, I don't know the national statistic, but I know here in California, some like 67% of endangered species spend all or part of their lives on privately owned rangeland. So ranchers are a partner with conservationists in protecting these endangered species. Sometimes it's positioned as ranchers versus wildlife, or like where wildlife are, ranchers can't exist, which really isn't true, in my opinion.
Right. Farmers and ranchers are among the original environmentalists, right? Conservationists, stewards of the land. So, I'd like to think in most cases, the folks are rowing into the same direction. But, a lot of the issues you cover are kind of those more extreme ones that people need to know about so that these issues don't continue to be exasperated. And they need to know about the work that folks are doing to kind of right size some of these environmental laws, including the Endangered Species Act, NEPA, Clean Water Act, that have candidly just been weaponized against rural communities over time.
So you guys just released this paper at AFPI called The Mexican Gray Wolf, A Threat to Rural Prosperity, which you wrote. This is an issue specifically, especially impacting the American Southwest. Tell me a little bit about what ranchers and producers down there are seeing with the Mexican gray wolf.
That's right. So this is a subspecies of the gray wolf, native to Mexico, actually. So they sent it to us. And it had been around prior to the 1900s, most definitely. And what's unique about this, I mean, it's not unique in that it's a predator, same characteristics of a gray wolf, likes to eat livestock, is that we had about eradicated it in the 1900s as folks were kind of getting settled, building their farming and ranching businesses. Obviously, these types of predators were threatening their livestock, and they were sort of dwindling in population, nearly extinct, for the exact reasons we're seeing occur again today. So the Endangered Species Act passed in the 1970s, and there was a move to reintroduce the Mexican wolf. So we went from government being sort of okay, understanding that these were a threat to livelihoods in rural America, back to now we want to like slowly reintroduce them. I don't think anyone should be surprised to see that now we have inherited the exact problems that we tried to get rid of before. And by experimental population, there's this like 10J rule under the ESA, Endangered Species Act, where you can introduce them in a certain area. We, the United States, we did a captive breeding program, an agreement with Mexico, and we bred them up. And then in the 90s, slowly reintroduced them, I believe in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. And they're back, and we're facing the same issues of they have become habituated to humans, killing not just livestock and livelihoods, but pets, horses, what have you. It has the ability to devaluate property values, harness potential for ranching in the long term. And so we think that there are some measures that the administration could take to kind of better manage this population.
Right.
There's been a congressional hearing on it too, by the way, just on the Mexican wolf. I know there's a lot of wolf issues, but Chairman Westerman has really shown a light on this, and he did so over the summer, I believe.
He is the head of the Congressional Western Caucus, correct? Chairman Western. Okay. Yeah,
Well, the House Natural Resources Committee, but
House
yeah.
Natural Resources Committee. Okay. Okay. Yeah, and I don't know a lot about this, which is why I was excited to talk to you about it. We have a different species of wolf up here that we're dealing with in Northern California. They're larger. I've written about that, report about that a bit. Most people I talk to think that it's not a native species, that the species that we're dealing with, the gray wolf that we have in the Intermountain West, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, Oregon, and now Northern California, is a Canadian wolf. And it's much bigger, and people worry about human interaction somewhere down the line. But it's sort of the pattern you're talking about where, for some reason, our ancestors decided not to coexist with these predators, or at least to manage them pretty severely for probably good reason at the time. And we've kind of forgotten or chosen to ignore that wisdom that led them to make those decisions, and we're reversing some of it.
With respect to Mexico, so if this species is so precious, it's called the Mexican wolf. Let me tell you this, Keely. So when we did the captive breeding program with them, we entered into all sorts of regulatory overlap with them insofar as to delist this species. It has been maintained historically by the Department of Interior. There has to be so many of them over time. And the number is tied to how well Mexico does in maintaining headcount there. Well, they aren't pulling their weight at all. We have surpassed our goals. They have not met theirs. I'm happy to follow up and get you those statistics, but I can tell you the numbers are stark. They don't care. They haven't pulled their weight in the deal. So it's kind of a de facto deterrent to U.S. government to be able to say that we're good to delist them because our success rate is tied to Mexico and they're never going to pull their weight. And so a lot of the proponents of keeping the wolves point to this agreement with Mexico. And I'm here at the America First Policy Institute. I'm like, hey, well, these goals shouldn't be tied, especially if a country who's sending us or who has sent us a species named after them doesn't care enough to then repopulate it. Why are our goals tied to theirs?
Yeah, your report says we have something like 300. I can't find the number right in front of me. 320, which is a number that was thrown out there as a delisting benchmark.
That's
correct?
Right. That's our number, and they still didn't meet their targets that were set lower than our own. So top line, they're not pulling their weight on a species that's named after their own country.
Right. And why should U.S. farmers suffer more because our partners allegedly aren't doing their job?
We had a goal, I think, in 2022. So under the Mexican Wolf Recovery Plan at the Department of Interior, there's goals. And I think in 2022, we had a goal of 145 for the US. I want to say it was like around 100 for Mexico that they didn't meet. These numbers have gone way up since then, according to the
Right.
congressional testimony for the hearing I just told you about. So, yeah, we're pulling our weight, and Mexico didn't even meet their own target. So.
What kind of feedback are you hearing from ranchers and probably just residents too at this point in New
That's
Mexico and
right.
Arizona that led you guys to take action on this?
Actually, America First Policy Institute, we have wonderful state chapter leaders in New Mexico and Arizona. And they got together with some local cattlemen, stakeholders. Tom Patterson goes to church with one of them who actually testified before the House Natural Resource Committee about the problem. He's a rancher. And they actually are who brought it to us. So that just tells me, America First Policy Institute, we truly are getting our policy and our research starting from the ground up. And so it's been great to work with them on that.
I love that. Yeah, you're hearing from people who are dealing with this on the front lines, so to speak. This is very familiar because I know Congresswoman Harriet Hageman in Wyoming. I love her. She's amazing.
I do too.
She talks a lot about grizzly delisting and how we've reached our benchmarks that we set out to, hit a long time ago, and government's not doing anything about it. They're not taking action to recognize reality and delist grizzlies in some of these states where there's been more and more human interaction. So that's another problem with the ESA is once we hit these benchmarks, it's not like there's an automatic trigger function to, eradicate these protections. It's like they still continue to protect these animals past those benchmarks. Is that right? Is there nothing that like automatically goes into place once we hit our goals?
So we have proposed and been supportive of automatic delistings before, just for that reason. Fortunately, we have an administration happy to work on these issues. That may not always be the case, but yes, even if you hit your target, there can still be a whole sort of rigmarole. And I will say, because this has sort of become like a legal battlefield, I'm sure the departments have to think about litigation and they want, their policies to ultimately be successful. So I'm sure they have a lot to think about when it comes to legal viability as well. So unfortunately, you don't just hit a number. There's a lot of pieces that need to fall into place, but it's important to meet the numbers because then you're at the table.
You reference lawsuits. These are from big NGOs that have a lot of money. They get a lot of donations. Ranchers don't have those types of resources usually. So neither do farmers, neither do people with cats in suburban neighborhoods who don't want their pets eaten.
I know. I mean, you look at who's been kind of at the forefront of pushing for a reintroduction, which I still can't get over. We did this to ourselves, reintroducing this predator. I mean, it is multiple major NGOs, a couple more local regional groups, but everyone's signing the same letters and supporting each other, a lot of sue and settle types. So here we are. It is a daunting wall that you're up against sometimes, but I'm so thankful our organization has supported me, our work, Kip Tom, Chrissy Mullen, Sarah Fry, and kind of taking on issues like these. Secretary Bernhardt is very involved, former DOI secretary at the America First Policy Institute. So we're just lucky to have the talent and resources able to stand up for these farmers because that's what we're up against, that wall, right?
Right, exactly. And it is exciting to see that you guys are taking direct feedback from producers who are dealing with this. So you list a few policy recommendations in this paper. Can you talk about a couple of those? You would lay out the threat, you lay out the numbers that we've rebuilt. And before we do that, really quick, I do just want to say, I don't feel like we can't have room for predators. West is big. We have room for all kinds of species out here. It's about management. And a lot of times when you don't have management that considers human use and human interaction, it ends up hurting the predators. In Northern California, we have too many bears, too many mountain lions, and now we're bringing wolves in. It puts them on a path to human interaction, which is never good for predators. Predators need to be kept in the wild in order to survive, because once people start dealing with predators too much, sentiment turns against them. So there has to be, in my opinion, some protections for these predators, some management that makes sense, some smart policy that reflects how many predators we have and how many predators an area can actually handle. You can't just have unlimited predator populations. There's all kinds of consequences, including for the predators themselves. Is that fair to say?
Nope, 100%. That's right.
In light of that, You guys have some very smart policy recommendations that you list in this paper, which I definitely recommend people read. Tell me about what you guys are encouraging the administration to do to help deal with this.
That's right. And thank you for honing in on that. While we do write papers, we're also a do tank. So we'd like to then now take these and go see them be implemented. There's a couple things. We kind of start with this gold standard. I mean, Congress should pass legislation removing the Mexican wolf from the ESA. Endangered Species Act reform, for kind of a lot of different reasons, has been hard for Congress to deliver to date. Certainly, delisting the gray wolf, I think, could get rid of the listing for the Mexican wolf, which would mean farmers and ranchers have more flexibility in managing these species should they get too close to their property. I don't think folks are looking to go hunting. I think they're looking to just manage, to your point, their property, especially when it comes to the Mexican wolf. The Fish and Wildlife Service at the Department of Interior, they could undertake a rulemaking to remove the Mexican wolf as demonstrated by all the benchmarks in their 10J reintroductory policy. They could move to delist it. Whether or not they'd want to do that as part of the larger gray wolf delisting, I'll defer to the experts there, because what we want is the most legally viable delisting action. None of these are doable, and with the wave of a wand, a lot of thought needs to occur. And I am hopeful that they see this as an opportunity, at least the administration moving forward, absent Congress. Break. Another neat thing they could do is the ESA has a human safety, I don't want to say exemption, but almost like a permit when the specimens constitute a demonstrable but not immediate threat to human safety. I think we've seen that used recently in the state of California. We were just talking about Sierra County. There could be an argument to be made that could be a tool for local policymakers to pursue with the Fish and Wildlife Service in Arizona and New Mexico with respect to the Mexican wolf. That is exciting. You don't need Congress for that. Amazing. And then a couple of other things that the Department of Agriculture could look into. It doesn't necessarily help with the management aspect, but there is a livestock indemnity program that USDA administers called the LIP. And it's actually really tough if the predator's not there and no one sees it. Just the burden of proof is really difficult. If federal government wasn't so cautious and suspect with their claims, maybe try to make the burden of proof a little bit easier for farmers and ranchers to prove they've lost livestock. If they lost livestock, they've lost livestock.
Right.
And they to up until recently haven't even been made whole through this payment program. So at least be a little bit more willing to work with them on the criteria of what it means to have a take under the livestock indemnity program guidelines.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. And in New Mexico, in Arizona, has that reached the point where people are starting to worry about human interactions because the population is getting so big? Is that what you're hearing from producers there?
Tom Patterson, who is a friend of our New Mexico chapter, he testified on the Hill. He referenced instances of backyard encounters. Even if they've become habituated to humans, these are still predators. These aren't animals we were meant to commingle with on a daily basis. So I think we need to start treating them as such. So yes, Tom Patterson has certainly driven the point home that these have become very visible in the communities.
That is part of the ESA that we can use to kind of push back on some of the more extreme uses of ESA when it comes to predators. That's really
right.
interesting.
It's in the Code of Federal Regulations, 17.21 prohibition section. I'm not sure we've exhausted it as much as it could be to date,
Right.
but folks need to be honest and transparent when they do use it, because we need that tool to be reserved for the most extreme and necessary cases, right? But it is there.
Completely. Are people in New Mexico and Arizona allowed to use lethal take? I know in California we have our own endangered species protections, and lethal take is not allowed unless there's a direct risk to human life, which, as you mentioned, is really hard to prove, even harder to prove than a livestock kill. Do you know off the top if that's the case in Arizona or New Mexico?
I don't have the list. I will tell you that the 10J experimental use population, where they were brought back into, those management techniques are more flexible than um, other ESA protected, whether it's wolves or what have you. But what I can tell you is, even though it's experimental and there's more flexibilities, it's still a problem there.
Right. I was just looking up because I think that's actually in Colorado. Our new head of Fish and Game just highlighted the fact that the Colorado wolf reintroduction was also designated an experimental population, which is
Yep,
why I believe they blocked Colorado from getting gray wolves from Canada, which is where they were getting these wolves before, as because of that experimental status. So interesting that it hasn't really been properly implemented previously, and now that you have an administration that's interested in farmers and ranchers and rural people who also have to live with these animals, not just environmental folks who have their own agenda, you're getting a little bit more balance and maybe a return to what the ESA was written to do in the first place.
that's right.
Yeah.
This issue, I know it's very granular to a certain part of the country, but my goodness, if Mexico is not going to do their part and we've done our part, it's time to protect our farmers and ranchers.
Well, thank you guys for listening to producers in these rural areas who've been dealing with this for a long time, haven't got attention. I was grateful to learn more about this. Don't know a lot about the Mexican gray wolf in the Southwest. Be sure to read Tate's paper. I'll share it at americaone.com so you guys can learn more about what the American First Policy Institute is recommending and keep following this story to see what the administration does with it.
And Keely, thanks for doing what you do and providing a platform for farmers and ranchers. My goodness, the world needs 1,000 more Keelys. So thank you.
You're too kind, Tate. Appreciate you. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.